This is you, stepping out of a decaying apartment building on the south side of Indianapolis at 5:52 in the morning, wearing a faded gray hoodie, cheap work boots, and the kind of face people stop noticing after a hard life has rubbed the shine off it. You have a paper cup of gas station coffee in one hand and a lunch you barely want in the other. Then four unmarked SUVs slide into the alley like they already know where this story ends. Doors swing open. Men in tactical vests spill out fast, efficient, practiced. Someone shouts for you to get on the ground. You do. Your cheek hits cold concrete. Coffee spills under your face, warm for half a second, then gone. A knee pins your back. Plastic bites your wrists. You don't fight because the terrifying part isn't the guns or the yelling or the metal closing around your hands. It's hearing a voice above you say your real name, Daniel Mercer, as if the last 6 months under a borrowed identity were nothing but a childish delay. They haul you up and push you into the back seat. When the door slams, it sounds less like an arrest than a verdict you've been listening for in every hallway, every siren, every knock after midnight. The strange thing isn't that they found you. The strange thing is how long you managed to believe they wouldn't. You lower your eyes to your stained jeans, to the coffee soaking into the cracks of the pavement outside, and suddenly none of Indianapolis matters. The alley disappears. The agents disappear. Even the past does. 9 years earlier, all you really had was hunger. Long before the handcuffs, before the fake name, before a federal agent pressed your face into wet concrete. There was Toledo, Ohio, and a winter that seemed determined to strip you down to whatever a man became when pride stopped being useful. You were 27, recently cut loose from an auto parts plant that had shut down with the kind of corporate language that made ruin sound administrative. Before that, you had done whatever work kept the lights on for another week. Warehouse loading, food delivery, roofing in the summer, demolition cleanup when somebody knew somebody. None of it lasted. Nothing ever stayed long enough to feel like a life. By then, you were 2 months behind on rent. Your landlord had stopped knocking like a human being and started taping notices to your door in blocky legal language you only half understood, though the message was clear enough: pay or disappear. Your refrigerator held a half-gallon of milk that had started to smell wrong, a bottle of mustard, and leftover takeout too old to trust. The gas tank in your Chevy was hovering near empty. The power company had already sent one warning. Your phone buzzed with numbers you no longer answered. When your mother called, you lied in the voice people use when they don't want to be saved. You told her you were fine, that interviews were coming, that something would break your way soon. She wanted to believe you, so she did. That made it worse. You still remembered the one thing your father left behind before walking out when you were 11. A thief is always a thief, he had said, dragging a duffel bag to the door like he was the only honest man in the room. You hated him long enough to promise yourself you would never become the kind of person he could predict. That promise held until hunger started changing shape. It wasn't dramatic at first. It crept in quietly, through exhaustion, embarrassment, and the dull panic of running out of ordinary options. The day the thought first took form, you were standing in line at a local bank to withdraw the last money in your account. You looked through the bulletproof glass of the tellers, at the older security guard by the entrance, at the cameras, at the locked doors farther inside, and then at the withdrawal slip in your hand. The question arrived so softly it almost felt harmless. How much cash moves through a place like this on a Friday? You didn't have a plan. You had something worse. You had a question that refused to leave once it found a home in your head. By that evening, the thought had stopped feeling abstract and started following you around like a stray dog that had decided you were its owner. You tried to drown it in routine. You drove through Toledo, checked your phone for jobs that never called back, sat in a grocery store parking lot doing ugly math on what little remained in your account. Then ended up where men with shrinking options always seem to land. A dim bar with cheap beer, weak neon, and silence thick enough to hide shame in. That was where Travis Boone found you again. Travis had been a mechanic before layoffs gutted his shop. He owed child support he couldn't keep up with, carried debt that made his hands shake, and spoke with the dangerous confidence of a man who thought bad ideas failed only because other people were cowards. After a few beers, he leaned over and started talking about a small bank branch outside town. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just like he was describing a shortcut on a back road. Friday cash flow, aging security, predictable routines. In his mouth, it sounded less like a violent crime than a dirty little correction life would never approve of, but might briefly reward. You didn't tell him yes. You didn't need to. Travis mistook your silence for caution, but it was really recognition. Something in you had already moved closer. You hated that. You hated how carefully you listened, how your mind arranged his words into possibility instead of warning. On the drive home, you fed yourself every lie desperate people use when they need to make a line disappear. Banks had insurance. Nobody had to get hurt. It would be one time. Just enough to catch up. Just enough to breathe. You even pictured calling your mother with rent paid and groceries in the fridge, giving her one peaceful night she had not earned through worry. Then your father's voice came back. That old sentence dragging behind it like a rusted chain, and what made it unbearable was not the judgment. It was the fact that it no longer sounded impossible. Later, parked outside your apartment, with the engine off, you sat gripping the steering wheel until the windshield fogged and the heater clicked itself cold. You told yourself you were deciding, but that was another lie wearing nicer clothes. Deep down, you already knew silence could be consent. A man can cross a line without moving an inch. All he has to do is stop arguing with the part of himself that wants out. You barely slept. Every time your eyes closed, you saw the bank lobby from the week before, even though nothing had happened there yet. By morning, your nerves had turned physical. Your hands twitched. Your mouth stayed dry. Travis showed up in a stolen sedan with the jittery energy of a man confusing panic for courage. He tossed you a dark sweatshirt and kept talking through the drive, filling the car with half jokes and fake certainty, as if enough noise could shrink what you were about to do. It couldn't. When the branch came into view, something inside you made one last weak attempt to pull the wheel in the opposite direction, but desperation had already signed for both of you. You parked, stepped out, and for one absurd second the morning looked too ordinary to contain disaster. A mother held the door for an older man. A teller inside smiled at a customer. The flag near the entrance moved gently in the wind. Then you crossed the threshold, and the version of you that still believed this was temporary started to disappear. Inside, everything sharpened. The hum of the air conditioner, the shine of the tile, the chemical smell of floor cleaner. The old security guard by the entrance looked up with tired eyes that had probably seen 20 years of boredom and none of what was now unfolding. Travis moved first, louder than planned, angrier than necessary, his voice cracking through the room and turning every head towards you. That was when the unreality ended. A woman near the waiting chairs gasped and clutched her purse to her chest. An older customer lowered himself to the floor with both hands raised, like his knees hurt too much for fear to hurry them. One teller froze completely. Another began to cry before you even reached the counter. The youngest teller, hair tied back, stared at you with a calm that unsettled you more than panic would have. Your own voice came out wrong when you demanded cash, thinner and higher than the one you had rehearsed in your skull. She moved with mechanical efficiency, opening drawers, stacking bills, keeping her breathing steady as if the bank had trained her for men like you and she refused to make you feel larger than you were. That should have been a relief. Instead, it made you feel ridiculous, exposed, almost angry. 90 seconds inside that room felt like a year lived under bad lighting. Then you saw the child. A boy no older than 6 sat beside a woman on the floor, staring straight at you with open curiosity, not terror, as if he were trying to understand what kind of person steps into a normal morning and breaks it on purpose. Something in your chest turned cold. You grabbed the bag when it was full enough to feel heavy, though not heavy enough to justify any of this, and backed away before greed could start negotiating for more. The escape blurred. Sunlight hit you like accusation. The parking lot seemed wider than before, full of invisible eyes. Travis kept shouting, telling you to move, move, and you did, because movement was easier than thought. By the time you were alone in a cheap roadside motel, the adrenaline had drained just enough to leave shame behind. The cash on the bedspread looked impressive for less than a minute. Then it started shrinking into groceries, rent, overdue bills, gas, maybe a few weeks of breathing room if you were careful. Not a future, not even a solution. Just a pause purchased at a price your mind had not finished calculating. You paid what you owed, stocked your kitchen, and watched your landlord's attitude soften almost overnight, but relief didn't last. It curdled into a new kind of dread because the worst thing about surviving the first robbery wasn't what it did to your conscience, it was what it taught your fear. It taught it that you could walk into hell and come back with cash in your hands. Nothing about the days after felt triumphant. Relief came in fragments. A full refrigerator, the rent caught up, the lights still on, your landlord suddenly remembering how to be polite. But what stayed with you longer than comfort was the discovery that the world had not ended. No squad cars appeared outside your building. No detective knocked on your door. That silence changed you more than the money did. Travis took it as proof that he had been right all along. He spent fast, talked too much, showed up in new clothes he couldn't explain, and carried himself like a man who believed surviving once made him bulletproof. You started to understand he was not a partner. He was a fuse already burning. When he introduced you to Ray Holloway, the difference was immediate. Ray had once worn a sheriff's badge in a county one town over until corruption stripped him of it and left behind something colder than shame. He did not brag. He listened, watched, and spoke in short, controlled sentences that made Travis sound like a child playing gangster in a parking lot. Under Ray's influence, the jobs became less chaotic, less emotional, and far more corrosive. You stopped thinking in terms of panic and started thinking in terms of routine. Small branches in forgettable towns, cash divided quickly, buried quietly, never flashed. You learned how to look poorer than you were, how to leave no sudden trace of improvement, how to make caution feel like discipline instead of fear. From the outside, you became invisible. From the inside, you were deteriorating. Sleep turned shallow and unreliable. A siren blocks away could send your heart hammering against your ribs. The sight of a police cruiser in traffic made your palms go slick on the steering wheel. Sometimes you woke up convinced someone had spoken your name from the dark, only to find your apartment silent except for the refrigerator clicking on and off. You kept feeding yourself the story that made everything bearable. The system had discarded you first. You were only taking back what life had denied you. It sounded reasonable at 3 a.m. Less so in daylight, but you repeated it often enough that it began to resemble belief. Money accumulated in hiding places, taped beneath drawers, sealed inside old toolboxes, folded into envelopes inside winter boots. You bought nothing flashy, trusted no one, and drifted further from the man who once thought honesty was the last possession nobody could take from him. Needles of guilt still broke through, especially when you remembered the boy at the first bank, but you learned to push the image aside because memory was bad for efficiency. What frightened you now was not the law. It was how quickly repetition could turn horror into procedure. And somewhere inside that procedure waited a cost you still had not paid. It happened in a town small enough that people still looked up when the bank door opened, the kind of place where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen before noon. By then you had trained yourself to move through these rooms without letting your mind attach to faces, but that morning something felt wrong almost immediately. The branch was quieter than expected, the air too still, the spacing between bodies slightly off, as if the world had shifted half an inch and only your nerves had noticed. Ray sensed it too. You saw it in the way his shoulders tightened. But by then you were already inside, already committed, already leaning on the illusion that routine could make anything safe. The security guard near the entrance was younger than the others had been, maybe early 30s, broad through the chest, the kind of man who had not yet been worn down into passive survival. When everything broke loose, he did not freeze. He hesitated, and that hesitation was worse because it meant he was deciding. You saw his hand move. You saw Ray move faster. Then came the sound, blunt and metallic and sickeningly intimate, the kind of sound that does not belong to movies because movies clean it up. The guard dropped hard. His head struck the floor. For one impossible second, the room went silent except for somebody sobbing near the teller line. Blood spread across the polished tile with shocking speed, red and glossy and completely unlike the abstract danger you had been living inside. You stared because your mind refused to understand that this was now part of your life, something that had happened in a room where your body was standing. Ray barked at you to move, and your legs obeyed before your conscience could. You got out. You always got out. That was the curse. In the car, neither of you spoke for the first mile. Your pulse thrashed in your throat. You kept seeing the guard's body folding downward, kept hearing the collision replay with perfect clarity, as if memory had decided this was the moment worth preserving forever. After that day, all your old explanations died. You were no longer a desperate man doing ugly math with survival. You were someone who carried violence into ordinary places and left it there for strangers to bleed through. Sleep became a hostile territory. Some nights you dreamed the guard opened his eyes and looked straight at you from the floor. Some nights his face changed into your mother's. Some nights it was your own. Travis came back around soon after, broke again, sweating debt and bad luck, pretending loyalty while really smelling opportunity. You wanted him gone, but men like Travis do not disappear cleanly. Meanwhile, local news stations started using phrases like pattern, linked incidents, multi-county investigation. Your name was not in their mouths yet, but you could feel the walls narrowing. Once blood enters a story, it stops asking whether you'll fall. It only decides when. Travis got caught in Kentucky on a job so sloppy you knew the danger had changed. It was no longer cameras, patrol cars, or a teller remembering your height. It was memory. Your name in his mouth, your face in his head, the pieces of your life he had watched enough to trade. You left Toledo fast, apartment abandoned, car sold cheap, cash split into envelopes. In Indianapolis, you rented a narrow unit under a borrowed name and took warehouse shifts unloading pallets for wages that would have insulted the version of you who once counted stolen money on motel bedspreads. But invisibility became the only luxury that mattered. You kept your purchases forgettable, your story thin, your eyes lowered. For a while, it almost passed for safety. Then, one Tuesday before sunrise, brakes cut through the alley, boots hit pavement, and strangers who had done their homework spoke your real name like they had owned it for years. After the arrest came the courtroom, and after the courtroom came arithmetic. Camera stills, witness statements, Travis cooperating. One old frame capturing part of your face when you made one careless adjustment. Your public defender told you to plead before the weight landed. 12 years if you gambled and lost, less if you admitted what the record already knew. For once, the numbers were honest. You took the deal. Prison was not constant violence. It was repetition. Fluorescent mornings, metal toilets, meals that kept your body moving without feeding anything human in you. Men who measured weakness quietly and remembered everything. Your mother visited when she could, paying too much and traveling too far just to sit behind thick glass and tell you she was praying. She never asked for the story. By then, she no longer needed it. When you got out, nearly a decade had been cut from your life, so cleanly it felt less like punishment than theft. You were 36, employable only to men who liked desperate workers because desperate workers stayed quiet. One night, in a room smaller than dignity, you added up everything the robberies had ever brought in. The total looked big until you divided it by the years you had surrendered. Then it shrank into something pathetic. Less than steady work might have given you, far less than freedom was worth. That was the last humiliation. You robbed banks for money, but money was never what vanished most completely. What you spent was time, and time is the one debt life never refunds. And if that hit harder than you expected, leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you most. The hunger, the fear, or the years that vanished. If you want more stories that put you inside the choices that ruin lives one step at a time, subscribe and stay close. Because the next story begins the same way most disasters do, with one small decision that doesn't look dangerous until it's too late.